Thank you, and thank you, Isabel. And I too would like to welcome you and express my appreciation for your joining us today at this really groundbreaking event for Zonta and for Snohomish County. We have in our audience today elected officials from our local, county, state, and federal governments. We have representatives from our legal community and from our institutions of higher learning. There are a number of social service agencies represented here today, and we also have community activists of many stripes. So I know that there are a number of you who are here because you are supportive of the work of Zonta and you are familiar with what we do. But there are probably a number of you who may not have been aware that Zonta, in addition to being a service organization, is also an advocacy organization. And my preferred definition of advocacy, which comes from the internet, from yourdictionary.com, is advocacy is a type of problem solving designed to protect the personal and legal rights of individuals so that they can live a dignified existence. Many types of advocacy exist, with system advocacy being used to change systems and to promote social causes, and legislative advocacy being used to change laws. As Zontians, we are advocates for the changes both to our systems and to our laws that it result in improving the status of women. It has been clearly demonstrated that when women in a community are supported in their efforts to advance their status and are given the tools and education to improve their condition, the entire society benefits. Powerful advocates are well-informed and clearly focused on their goals so that when they speak out as individuals, they influence others to join them in supporting their cause. And well-informed and clearly focused advocacy groups are the movers and shakers in a community. They are the problem solvers who work to ensure that we can all live a dignified existence. So it is our goal today to provide you with information and inspiration, and to encourage you to join us in becoming strong advocates for improving the status of women. We will give you some specific steps that you can take to help move all of us closer toward our goal. Most of you have a packet at your seat that contains information about the United Nations Convention to Eliminate Violence Against Women, which Dr. Cardam will be talking about in some detail today. We hope that once you've learned more about CEDAW, you will join us and all Zontians in advocating for its ratification. And at the back of the room, on our display table, there is also material about several important issues that the Northwest Women's Law Center has been addressing to aid women in our state. And Lisa Stone will be discussing these in her talk. Please take this material and use it. Silence is the breeding ground for injustice, but many voices raised together can defeat the silence. Today, you are about to hear from three very inspiring examples of well-informed and clearly focused women and advocates. We are very honored to have them with us today. At the conclusion of their talks, we will have time for a limited number of written questions from the floor, and you have small index cards on your table for you to write your questions out. Please indicate to whom you would like to have the question addressed, and volunteers will come around and pick those up at the end. So now, to get us started, I have the privilege of introducing our moderator for today's forum. She is familiar to many of you as our outstanding Snohomish County prosecuting attorney. As prosecutor, she heads a team of 80 attorneys and 100 support staff members. She's committed to vigorously, fairly, and efficiently prosecuting those who commit crime in Snohomish County, to providing outstanding and timely legal advice and professional services to the Snohomish County and State of Washington governments, and to advocating for improving the justice system. She is the most passionate about the criminal work of her office and its impact on our communities. She is also the chair of the steering committee for Dawson Place Child Advocacy Center, where children and families victimized by physical or sexual abuse can receive coordinated, comprehensive care and support. Please join me in welcoming Janice Ellis.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a great turnout for the two distinguished speakers that you're going to hear today. My role really is to say very little and to save as much time as possible for both Lisa Stone and for Dr. Kardam to give their comments to you and to inspire you with the work they are doing, Lisa locally, Dr. Kardam both locally and internationally, to advance the rights and the interests of women in our respective communities. I guess I'll just say a few words about what I perceive to be the status of women's rights. The legal framework and the cultural support and enthusiasm that different countries and different legal systems and governmental systems have, of course, varies widely around the world. We in the United States enjoy a fairly mature legal system and a very robust social system through which women can and do achieve high levels of education, opportunity, and I think as we look around the room, we can safely say success. But that does not mean that there are not women, both here, locally, within our state, within our nation, that do not need our efforts and the voices of many other people like us to help bring them from their situation to a place of similar self-actualization. One of the tragedies in our world that I think is worth thinking about is that related to human trafficking. Within our own country, the third most common type of organized crime is human trafficking. It lags behind drug trafficking and gambling, but there it is, right in the top three. And for the women who are trafficked here from overseas or from within our own country are typically are trafficked for the purpose either of being used as sexual slaves or as indentured servants in domestic servitude or as farm labor. And in an excellent report from the state of California, those interviewed indicated that the primary reasons they did not step forward to seek assistance to escape their situation included fear of deportation. 97% indicated that that was their reason for remaining silent. Fear of retaliation was close behind at 91%. Lack of trust in the system at 90%. Lack of knowledge about available services, language difficulties, lack of knowledge about victim rights, lack of social support, all ranked between 70 and 80%, and finally at 68% that they were held in captivity. It is almost unthinkable to many of us in this room that we can have tens of thousands of people within our own country who are suffering that type of exploitation. And certainly the experience of those in our country is outmatched in other places around the world. I know you will give your enthusiastic attention to our two speakers, and I'm going to bring up to the podium Dr. Kardam, but before I do, I want to say just a few words of introduction of Lisa Stone, who will follow Dr. Kardam. Lisa is the executive director of the Northwest Women's Law Center and has served in that capacity since 1995. Lisa and I both started our practice of law in large Seattle law firms and knew each other back in the early days of our practice. And I'll tell you that back then, Lisa distinguished herself not only because of her incredible intellectual capacity, but her capacity for hard work and her from the very beginnings of her law career, her dedication to public interest law. So it surprised me not one whit when the Northwest Women's Law Center took her into the fold and elevated her to executive director, and she has done a fabulous job, as has everyone at the Northwest Women's Law Center, advancing the rights and interests of women here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm sure she will tell you about the litigation they're involved with. They have been very, very active for many years in our community and certainly will continue to be. Dr. Kardam comes to us from Monterey, California. I have to put my glasses on for this. Dr. Kardam has a 10-page curriculum vitae, so I am only giving you the absolute highlights, but I recommend that you find a copy of it and read it because she has had a fascinating life and has a tremendous experience to draw from. She is with the Graduate School of International Studies at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. She holds a PhD in political science from Michigan State University. She has a master's in political science from the University of British Columbia and a BA in philosophy from Istanbul University. She has over 15 years of experience in research, teaching, and operational work in gender and development policy, women's human rights, governance, democratization, and the application of global norms on human rights and women's human rights in local contexts. She has spoken and assisted organizations throughout the world for many, many years. She has authored 2 books and numerous articles. She has, as I said, a very distinguished CV, and it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome her up to the podium at this time. Dr. Kardam.
So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And first of all, I want to ask you, how many of you had heard of CEDAW or knew the exact opening of this, exact opening of what it means? This is very interesting, isn't it? Because it is an international convention, and I mean, certainly there's nothing wrong with not knowing it, but I would think that if I was talking to a group of people in Turkey, in Istanbul, there'd be more women knowing it because they use it. They use it for pressuring their governments to actually create change. So let's start from what CEDAW is, if you like. Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and it was drafted by the UN Commission on the Status of Women and unanimously accepted by the General Assembly of the UN in '79, and it became a treaty in 1981. How many states have ratified it? 185 states have ratified this treaty, but the US has not yet. So how did it come into being is the first question. And I think it came into being because of 2 major things. One, global women's networks that included US women's networks. And when I did my research on this, I found out that Zonta was part of this global women's networks under the UN auspices that actually helped bring about CEDAW and helped the global women's human rights right then. So I'd known about Zonta even then, 25 years ago. It's a very old organization. So this treaty came into being as a result of basically 2 causes, as I said. One, the global women's networks and the United Nations. And there are several governments that have been very, very supportive of women's human rights. And those are Northern European governments and Canada. So they have also been very supportive. So I would say that this is the result of CEDAW coming into being is because of these reasons. Now let's find out what it is. What exactly it is. It rests on 2 basic principles, CEDAW. One, prohibition of all forms of discrimination against women. 2, active promotion of equality between the sexes through women's empowerment. This is very interesting because it's not enough to say prohibition against women. That's not sufficient. What's needed, according to this treaty, is the active promotion of gender equality through temporary special measures like quotas, special policies that promote women's employment, which may be seen as affirmative action policies in this country. And this is how equality is achieved. In other words, the treaty says, look, where genders are not equal, in order to bring them up to par, women need to special measures and special empowerment measures so that prohibition against discrimination can be attained. So it's not in its prohibition is, of all forms of discrimination necessary, but active promotion of equality with active measures is absolutely important, without which this treaty would not work. I want to make that point very clear. So what is CEDAW's, what does it contain? Brief summary of its contents, if you like. One, legal equality. The right to political participation, the right to one's own nationality, the right to give one's child one's own nationality as a woman. So we're talking about legal equality. Two, rights to education and employment. Three, reproductive rights. Access to family planning, social services for childcare, full shared responsibility for child rearing for both sexes. It does not talk about the right to abortion, but it does talk about the right of access to family planning. Four, the states are obligated to work towards eliminating discrimination in social and cultural traditions, norms, and behaviors. In other words, for example, textbooks need to be revised, school programs need to be revised to eliminate stereotypes. So cultural norms have to be worked at to eliminate discrimination. There's a full text of CEDAW, which is like 15 pages, and you can go and look at it at the internet. It's actually very easy to find, the 50. But this is the summary. This is the brief summary that I wanted to present to you. Now I want to go into this different topic of how is it being implemented and monitored. It's a human rights treaty. So as a human rights treaty, women's human rights treaty, how is it successful? And first of all, I'll give you the positive, and then I'll give you some of the concerns with the treaty. I think that certainly the world's women are better off having the treaty than not having it, for sure. And I'll explain why. First, women's human rights and gender equality have become norms around the world that are accepted, and even people who don't believe in women's human rights pay lip service to it. It's incredible that gender equality, I go around the world working on gender issues, you can't believe, like 25 years ago, no one worried about women's rights, gender equality. Now, actually, gender equality has become an international political issue. And that's because also of the Nairobi conference, the Beijing conference. Believe me, people pay attention to it. So that's the first success. Second, it has allowed women's movements around the world to pressure their governments for legal changes. Let me give you an example. The women's movement in Turkey is very successful, actually very strong, and what they've done is they've succeeded in changing the civil code. You know what the civil code says now? Before it said man is the head of the family. Now it says both men and women together are responsible for the family. Of course, the implementation is a different matter, but the civil code says that, and that's a big success. A second success is there's a law for violence against women now, so that women who are, in fact, have violence domestically, they can go to the court or to the police station and actually get a response from the police. And the police and the judges are being trained for that. In Brazil, there's a women's police station that deals with this. In Ukraine, Nepal, Thailand, and the Philippines, trafficking laws have changed as a result of this. So what I'm saying is, these treaties are great for world's women, especially in developing countries, because it's like pressure from above and pressure from below on the governments to change their behavior. And that's what's happening around the world as a result of CEDAW. CEDAW is being used for that purpose, so I think this is fantastic. Number three, each ratifying nation of the treaty has to set up a national women's machinery. I don't like the word machinery, but what that really means is a women's affairs department, Ministry of Women's Affairs. So all the countries who have ratified it actually have a department or ministry for women's affairs. And this is like an ally of the women's movement in those countries, which is great. Then there's a monitoring body of the CEDAW Treaty. It's called the Commission on CEDAW, made up of experts. And all countries that have ratified have to report to this commission. And they have to explain what they did for the last 4 years. And the commission actually holds them accountable for the changes that they're going to make in the next several years and come back and say, yes, we've actually achieved these changes. So this commission actually works pretty well, but I must tell you that I've seen some CEDAW reports that are like 3 pages, and others are 100 pages. So there's a great variation about, the reports filed by countries to this commission. But the commission now also accepts what's called shadow reports. And shadow reports are from NGOs. So these NGOs, for example, again, I'll give an example from Turkey. There's the government report that says one thing, and then there's the women's organizations report that says something quite different. And the commission listens to both, and therefore is able to get a much varied understanding of what's going on in that country. So having said that, one more thing about successes, and I'll move on to some of the concerns. All international development agencies, I work with development agencies, have actually taken, they're accountable now to promote gender equality. And they're accountable for women's human rights. And there's a lot of funds out there for women's projects around the world to promote empowerment of women. And gender experts are being hired to international agencies to work on these issues. All of this is the result of the rise of a global women's movement, and I think the culmination of that is CEDAW, which is the norms, which embodies the norms and principles of global gender equality, of women's human rights. So I personally think this is a pretty amazing achievement. But does it have some problems, concerns? Of course it does. First of all, it's a treaty that it's legally binding, but the Commission cannot do very much in terms of sanctions. It can embarrass governments, so there's a reputational effect. Like next time you come, you make sure that the report is better or changed, but there's no sanction. For example, for a trade treaty, there could be a sanction because a country could be removed from the most favored nation clause so that it wouldn't trade in this particular area anymore, not allowed. But for human rights treaties, not just this one, it's really they rely on this embarrassment effect, so to speak. So that's one drawback, but I don't think it's just CEDAW's drawback. Another drawback of this treaty, or concerns or areas for improvement, is that many states have filed reservations. You would think that mostly it's the Muslim states that might have filed, but in fact many states have. Probably majority have filed some kind of reservation at some point, but then they've changed it over time too. You can go and find out more on this. Why reservations? I've asked myself, why is CEDAW, such a problem for some of these countries? This is what comes up. One, I think that proposed changes between the state and the citizens, its citizens, is more problematic than, for example, if IMF says, reduce your currency. For some reason, human rights and, countries, country or states have very strong, they perceive this as external interference, let's put it this way, because they want to have complete control over their own subjects, and they see that as external interference. Why? Because gender identities, masculinity, femininity, all of those are very deeply embedded in our identities. They are in our culture, in our religion and norms, and it takes a great deal of time to change. And pressure coming from outside can create a backlash, too, because these are embedded in traditions, cultures, and norms. So they're contested issues. We have to accept the fact that they're contested issues, depending on your beliefs, ideology, and religion. Some states also have reservations based on the Sharia, Islam states with majority Muslim, and they say that we're not going to take legal state-made laws and accept them because the Sharia is a divine law and therefore it's above man-made law. But I don't personally buy that because Tunisia and Morocco have actually changed and removed their reservations, even though at first they said, we're not going to accept these clauses, and in the end they accepted them and removed them. So clearly, if it's so divine, how come it could be changed so quickly? So there's something going on here. And what's going on here is, I have to say, cultures, religious norms, all of these are instrumentally used in many cases by political leaders to reject women's rights in order to protect male privilege. I have to say that because I see that over and over again. For example, in Tanzania, they said, well, women should not own land because it's not our norms, traditions, etc. Well, later on, it became clear that it was a political issue and that men did not want to give up their own, right to land. So there's some hypocrisy going on here. On the one hand, saying one thing but doing something else, and there's a protection of use of culture, religious norms, etc., for protection of political, basically, power, which we have to be careful about. So there we go. There is these issues with CEDAW, and these issues also have to do with one last thing I'll say. In international relations, there's always a tension between international law and sovereignty, domestic sovereignty. And clearly, and I'm going to move on to the US now, clearly, especially for a superpower like the US, looking at an international convention and putting it above US Constitution is not acceptable. So there is a tension between international multilateral law and going by that versus sovereignty of a state. This is true overall. So, okay, I want to go to the US now. The US has not ratified CEDAW, right? It's the only industrialized country that has not ratified CEDAW, and 90% of the countries around the world have. So Iran, Somalia, North Korea, Libya, those countries have not. Good company? And I don't understand it. As you can tell, I don't understand, but I'm trying to understand it with you. It has been signed. So CEDAW actually has been signed by the US. Who signed it? The Carter administration signed it. But since then, it has not been ratified. But before I go into why it has not been ratified, I want us to be positive and say, what has the US done regarding CEDAW? What it has done is it has done some things at the local and city levels, which is, I think, could be a very interesting idea for you here. This is what's happened. I just found this out. City of San Francisco enacted a local ordinance in 1998 based on CEDAW's principles to protect women's human rights. Gender equality is protected in the areas of economic development, employment, violence against women, health care, and others. The ordinance requires city departments to undergo gender analysis to monitor discrimination against women and girls in budget allocation, delivery of services, and employment practices. So by implementing for the CEDAW ordinance, the number of women in higher paying non-traditional jobs have increased, an effort to increase street lights have improved women's safety. The city is monitoring the availability of flexible work hours for women and training on sexual harassment in city departments and collecting data on women by city departments. I found that very interesting that the city of San Francisco actually adopted CEDAW as an ordinance and is working with it. The New York City is currently doing the same and adopting the San Francisco model. Thus, while the ratification of CEDAW at the national level continues to stall at the moment, we're working on it, I think the US women can work to implement CEDAW at the city, county, and state levels. But in order to be able to do that, we have to know what the arguments are for not ratifying the treaty. We have to know them in order to actually be